Marrakech, Morocco, September 9, 2023.
Ya بالسلامة عليكم.
Fucking hell.
Halinka, potem wyślesz nam też?
Halinka, wyślesz mi potem? Tak.
Zobacz, jak auto komuś uszkodziło.
Jezus, auto. Morocco's biggest earthquake in over 120 years struck south of Marrakech on Friday night with a magnitude of 6.8 magnitude. The quake struck in Morocco's high Atlas mountain range shortly after 11 p.m. local time at the relatively shallow depth of 18.5 kilometers or 11.5 miles, USGS said, with the epicenter located about 72 kilometers or 44.7 miles southwest of Marrakech, a city of some 840,000 people and a popular tourist destination.
Wesh. Hey, Cyril. Putain.
The powerful earthquake damaged buildings in major cities and sent people pouring into streets and alleyways from the capital Rabat to Marrakech, the country's most visited tourist destination and a UNESCO World Heritage site. Moroccans posted videos showing buildings reduced to rubble and dust and parts of the famous red walls that surround the old city in Marrakech damaged. The USGS said the quake had a preliminary magnitude of 6.8 when it hit at 11:11 p.m., with shaking lasted several seconds. Morocco's National Seismic Monitoring and Alert Network measured it at 7.2 on the Richter scale. The U.S. agency reported a magnitude 4.9 aftershock hit 19 minutes later. Friday's quake was felt as far away as Portugal and Algeria, according to the Portuguese Institute for Sea and Atmosphere and Algeria Civil Defense Agency, which oversees emergency response.
يا بالسلامة عليكم.
السمارة هذاك وجات على هذا الباتيسري هذا راه واحد جوج ضحايا مضروبين، واحد مضروب في الراس واحد مضروب في رجليه مهرس. الله اكبر الله اكبر.
C'est souvent comme ça? Ça a déjà arrivé?
Locals are said to have decided to stay outside their homes in case the city is rocked by powerful aftershocks. Another man in the historic city described feeling a violent tremor and seeing buildings moving. The earth shook for about 20 seconds. Doors opened and shut by themselves as I rushed downstairs from the second floor, he said. Additionally, power and phone lines were down for 10 minutes. Tremors were also felt further west near Taraudent, where a resident said he had fled his home and there had been aftershocks following the initial quake. Morocco's Interior Ministry said early Saturday that at least 300 people had lost their lives in provinces near the quake. The head of a town near the earthquake's epicenter told Moroccan news site 2M that several homes in nearby towns had partly or totally collapsed, and electricity and roads were cut off in some places. He said authorities were working to clear roads in the province so aid could flow to affected communities, but he also said the long distance between villages in the mountains meant it would take time to know the extent of the damage. The survey said the tremor struck at an oblique reserve fault which had one plate fall away almost like a landslide. Variations in early measurements are common, although either reading would be Morocco's strongest in years. Earthquakes are relatively rare in North Africa. Lai Mani, head of the Seismic Monitoring and Warning Department at the National Institute of Geophysics, said the earthquake was exceptional. Mountainous regions in general do not produce earthquakes of this size. It is the strongest earthquake recorded in the region. In 1960, a magnitude 5.8 tremor struck near the Moroccan city of Agadir, he said.
It's just past 1300 GMT, 2 p.m. in Morocco, where a powerful earthquake has killed more than 1,000 people and injured hundreds more. Officials are reporting significant and widespread damage across several regions. The number of dead is expected to rise. Well, this was the moment the magnitude 6.8 tremor struck late on Friday evening. As you can see, it sent people running for their lives. The tremor struck some 70 kilometers south of the popular tourist city of Marrakech. But the shocks were felt as far away as the coastal cities of Rabat, Casablanca, and Essaouira. It's the worst disaster Morocco has seen in more than 20 years. Hashim Ahlabarra begins our coverage.
Hours after a powerful earthquake struck Morocco, the scale of widespread devastation is now emerging. Flattened houses and streets that resemble a war zone. Marrakech is the closest major city to the epicenter of the quake. Rescue workers who have worked through the night continue to look for people trapped under the rubble. But there are several areas still out of reach and people are desperate.
Please share this. We need help. We need helicopters and aid. And the roads are closed and we can't drive. We need help to get people from under the rubble.
My parents are ill at home. It is necessary to get help. We cannot continue without water or electricity. The roads are blocked. We only wanted to get our parents out of the house, but we could not.
It began a little past 11 p.m. local time on Friday night, when many Moroccans were out. This is the moment when the earthquake struck, sending panic-stricken people out on the streets. Many others were jolted from their sleep. Piles of debris from flattened houses and collapsed buildings lined what were once residential areas. The desperate search for loved ones began soon after. A video posted online shows a mother trying to reach her children stuck under the rubble. The number of dead is rising.
We dispatched a number of security teams and rescue operation to various affected areas. We urge all citizens to stay calm. The Interior Ministry will update the public later.
The US Geological Survey says the epicenter was in the Atlas Mountains, some 70 kilometers southwest of Marrakech. There are reports of damage in Marrakech's Old Town, a UN World Heritage site. The quake was also felt as far away as the coastal cities of Rabat, Casablanca and Essaouira, and many people spent the night out on the streets.
The house rocked aggressively. Everyone was scared, and I was shocked. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought it was only my house that was moving because it's fragile and old. I heard people screaming. Everyone went out of their houses to the streets, which were full of people and women screaming.
Hospitals in Marrakech are treating hundreds of injured people. Now, many are worried about the risk of aftershocks in the coming days and weeks. Hashim Ahlabarra, Al Jazeera.
Hashim Ahlabarra joins us now live on set. And Hashim, the focus now on these particular hours. They are the hours that make the difference between life and death, right?
They are, and this explains why we're getting these numbers now climbing to more than 1,000 victims of the earthquake. We're talking about also dozens of people critically injured.
So these are assumedly people going through the rubble and finding their loved ones, sadly, not alive.
Exactly, and we are yet to get a sense of what happened in Ighil, which is the epicenter of the earthquake. This is one of the villages that were massively affected by the earthquake, along with Ijokak, Wirgan, and many other areas in the Atlas Mountains. It will take the government some time to be able to get a complete picture of what happened, and I think this explains why we're getting these numbers further increasing. The authorities are saying that the army has been deployed with specialized units to try to rescue those trapped under the rubble. It's going to be extremely, extremely difficult situation.
I think the WHO was saying that something like 300,000 people could have been impacted by this. Do we have any idea how many of that number might be still trapped under the rubble right now?
You see, this is the thing, because we're talking about villages. To be able to drive to those villages, I myself drive to those villages, and it takes me sometimes 7 hours to drive just for 35 kilometers. Very rough terrain, very extremely difficult to get access to. And there are thousands and thousands of local people living in local communities in these desolate mountainous areas. And this is the concern. The concern is how many people are still trapped under the rubble, and how many buildings have been severely compromised because of this earthquake.
And if I can add to that, what happens to the people who survived this? Now, you and I will remember when we covered the devastating earthquakes in Turkey in February. One of the challenges that we faced, and many people faced in the disaster zone, was basic things like finding water.
This is winter, the beginning of a rainy season in Morocco. The army is saying that it has set up the first makeshift hospital in the area. The challenge will be to set up makeshift tents in those areas or move people to temporary shelters. We have to wait and see the number of people affected in those areas. If we're talking about thousands, then the authorities will definitely have to set up immediate tents in those areas to cope with the growing number of the people displaced because of the earthquake. And this explains why the authorities are appealing on people for calm, saying that they are doing their best to try to cope with the magnitude of this earthquake.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Hashim Ahlabarra. Well, Martin Mai is Professor of Earth Science and Engineering at King Abdullah University in Saudi Arabia. Joins us from Jeddah. Good to have you with us. So, first of all, take us through how frequent, how prone is this area to earthquakes?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to express my condolences and deep grief to the people of Morocco and all those who have been affected. Listening to the stories and seeing the videos is just disheartening. This area is not unknown to experience earthquakes. It had earthquakes in the 1960s and in the early, let's say, 19th century. They are infrequent, but they do occur. And we, from a scientific point of view, know the earthquake hazard in this region exists, as documented by these previous earthquakes and their damage and fatalities that these earthquakes had created. So it's not entirely unknown or uncommon to experience earthquakes there.
How much of a threat are aftershocks, and for how long are they a threat to people who might be, wondering, can they go back indoors? Can they, if they still have houses left, is it safe for them to go home?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, in fact. In particular, if slightly damaged houses are, experiencing just a little bit additional shaking from aftershocks, they might just fall down at that point. So from seismological, let's say, experience and statistical work, we know that aftershocks of magnitude 5 to 5.5 are likely to occur after this earthquake of magnitude 6.8. So these are strong events, strong quakes that, create substantial shaking. And these aftershocks will continue for several weeks. And so it's not uncommon to see even a magnitude 5 earthquake, I'm speculating, say in a month or two, as the Earth, let's say, responds to the strong shaking it experienced and what we call the changes in stress on the fault that caused this earthquake.
You mentioned the earthquakes of the 60s. Have lessons been learned, as far as you can tell, from those earthquakes in terms of construction codes and how life goes on?
Yeah, excellent question again. I have to admit, I don't really know. I've traveled myself in this area, in this very area that's now affected, a few years ago. And my observation on the buildings I saw, the building style, the classical construction style there is that it follows the traditional pattern. So mud brick, adobe brick buildings, not reinforced, not necessarily concrete. And I think in one of the interviews earlier with one of the victims who said that his house is fragile, I believe this is very much true for many of the village housing and even in the medieval cities like Marrakech. Very densely populated, very densely built, but to standards, that's the traditional architecture mostly. So I don't think, but I don't know for sure, I don't think this is really built according to seismic safe standards.
And looking at it from a seismic perspective, does this earthquake change the risk assessment for the region?
It will. First of all, if now scientists take this information from this earthquake, where precisely it occurred, how it occurred, and also examine what shaking levels were experienced, we can use that information to update or improve what we call the earthquake hazard maps, because they rely critically on information of past events like this one. Why we update, well, like the scientific and the engineering community updates these hazard maps, it is actually critical to address the question you asked, namely, how safe are our buildings? Is our building code still sufficient? And if it is sufficient, is it enforced? So there's always this, let me say, human component to natural hazards, that we cannot predict earthquakes, we cannot prevent earthquakes. The only thing we can do is to prepare for earthquakes. And so that's now a subsequent question that needs to be asked.
All right,
thank
you so much. Enough. Yes, let's hope so. Thanks so much for your analysis on that, Martin Mai.
Scenes of chaos and terror in Morocco, with people running for their lives as a powerful and rare earthquake shook the central region around the city of Marrakech. More than 1,000 people have been killed. Even more have been injured, and those numbers are expected to rise. There's a desperate rescue operation currently underway, extending into nearby mountainous villages. Searchers digging into the rubble with their bare hands in the hope of finding more survivors. Hello, everyone. I'm Natasha Fatah. You're watching CBC News Network. CBC's Dominic Velitis is in London, and he's tracking the latest developments in Morocco. Dom, what's the latest from the quake zone?
Well, Natasha, just to give you a bit of background here, this was a 7.2 magnitude quake. It hit just after 11 p.m. local time. The epicenter, as you mentioned there, was in the high Atlas Mountains, about 70 kilometers or so southwest of Marrakech. But tremors were felt much, much further afield. They were felt in the capital Rabat, in Casablanca and in Essaouira, and they were even felt in neighboring Algeria and in southern Spain. Now, the death toll keeps rising by the hour, Natasha, but certainly hundreds of people have been injured and killed. Local officials say many of the deaths are in those hard-to-reach mountainous areas which were closer to the epicenter and where people tend to live in older, more traditional buildings that are perhaps less resilient to natural disasters like earthquakes. And it could be some time, Natasha, before we get a better understanding, a fuller understanding of the situation in those particular areas, with officials warning it could be days before rescue teams reach some of them. Local media is reporting that roads leading to the mountain region are now jammed with vehicles and blocked with collapsed rocks. So that is obviously slowing the rescue effort down considerably. But there have been casualties in other parts of Morocco, Natasha, including, of course, in Marrakech, which is the nearest big city to the epicenter and which is a tourist hotspot. And many tourists and residents there spent last night out in the open, fearful of returning to their homes, to their hotels and guest houses should another quake strike, because there have been reports of several aftershocks since. The extent of damage to Marrakech, which is a UNESCO World Heritage site, is not entirely clear this morning. You may be aware that it is a place with a very rich history. Its medieval mosques, souks and palaces are a real magnet for tourists from all over the world, including from Canada. And we still don't know yet, Natasha, if any Canadians have been caught up in any of this. We have calls into the relevant authorities, to Global Affairs Canada, so hopefully we'll find out more in the coming hours or so, Natasha.
So, Dom, we have a rescue operation, then we're going to have to go through recovery, unfortunately, and then comes the reconstruction. All of this requires a great deal of support. What are we hearing in terms of disaster response domestically and internationally?
Well, domestically, as I say, the rescue operation appears to be focusing on those more mountainous areas at the moment, areas which were closer to the epicenter of last night's quake, and where many of the hundreds of deaths have been reported so far. In fact, Moroccan state television is now broadcasting images of troops being deployed to help with rescue efforts in those areas. But as you would expect with a disaster of this size, governments around the world have been quick off the mark to express solidarity and offer assistance. Turkey, Germany, the United States, the UK, France, Spain and Israel are just some of the many countries which have done so. Even Algeria, which broke off ties with Morocco 2 years ago, has said it will now open its airspace for humanitarian and medical flights to Morocco if it is requested. Natasha.
BC's Dominic Velitis in London. Thank you, Dom.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go right to the heart of the story and go to Marrakech, where we're joined by Peter Mercer. He's the owner of the Dar Saman guest house in Marrakech, and he's joining us from that private guest house now. Peter, I understand that you're okay. The structure behind you that you're in seems relatively good, and thank goodness for that. But take me back to last night when the earthquake hit. Where were you? What happened?
Okay, I live outside of the old city in the new part of Marrakech. So I live in a 3-story apartment building. So I was in my apartment last night when suddenly the building started to shake violently. And you know, you don't practice for these things. You don't know immediately what it is. So I thought for a moment, is that the washing machine doing spin? But I'm not washing any clothes, but it's so violent, and you almost can't remain standing. But quickly I knew I had to get out of the building. I feared that the building was going to collapse. I thought it was just my building. I didn't actually think this is an earthquake. So I rushed down the flights of stairs out onto the street, and there were lots of people already in the street. And Moroccans are speaking to each other in Arabic, and I'm English, and I don't speak that much Arabic, so I didn't immediately connect with anyone, and I didn't understand initially that it actually was an earthquake. I thought it actually was just my building initially, and then someone said to me in French that was an earthquake. So that, and then obviously, you know, the rest is history. I got my phone and started to monitor it online, but it was absolutely terrifying.
And despite not being able to speak Arabic, I'm sure you got a sense of how people were feeling. What was the general sense in the street?
Oh yes, I mean everyone was scared. I mean, because you know these things have aftershocks, so everyone was scared. You know, we all survived, or most of us survived the first one. At least I'm talking about Marrakech, modern Marrakech. But we're scared about the second one or a third one. So people were scared to go back inside their homes. In the new part of Marrakech, a lot of people live in apartment buildings, so they're 3, 4, maybe 5-story buildings, and you know the last place you want to be is on the 5th floor, trying to get out in a hurry. So a lot of people did stay in the streets talking. I mean, there was quite a not really festive, but a good atmosphere. People, Moroccans are very friendly, so you talk to everyone. But people were sitting in the streets, sitting on curbstones and so on, and shops and cafes stayed open. So you could grab a table and have a drink. You know, I'm talking about coffee or tea or something. And but people didn't want to go inside to sleep. I did. After 3 hours, I went back inside because the reports were that there'd been 3 more aftershocks. Each one was less powerful. So I was reassured by that. So I guess took the risk and it was okay.
And so that is where you live, which is in what I guess is described as New Marrakech.
Correct.
Okay, so we understand that New Marrakech isn't that bad. Describe to me where you are right now. Where is the hotel?
Okay, so I'm now in the Medina, which is the old city. It's the old walled city, where there are a lot of very old houses and buildings. Some of them made by with mud and concrete mixed together, walls, perhaps without decent foundations. So this is where the damage, structural damage has occurred in Marrakech. The Medina is pretty large, so a lot of it has survived unscathed, but there are situations where houses have fallen or huge cracks have developed in walls. I saw the minaret of a mosque close to the main Jamal al-Fanal Square collapsed entirely. Another one I saw has a big crack in it. People are injured or worse in these situations. But in the main, the Medina has survived relatively unscathed. But I'm not by any means diminishing what's happened to some people. But today, life did kind of carry on as normal for a lot of people. I mean, cafes are open, shops are open, the souks are open. But there's obviously a sense that, you know, this isn't over yet by any means.
Absolutely. Well, the search and rescue operations continue, Peter. I'll just bring you up to date. I don't know if you've seen the latest information. More than 1,000 people have lost their lives as a result of the earthquake. More than 1,000 have been injured, and authorities anticipate those numbers are just going to continue to rise. So based on your knowledge of Morocco, how the bureaucracy works, the infrastructure, is the country well equipped to manage this? Is there enough hospital space? Are there enough first responders?
Well, Morocco does a pretty good job of putting together in these situations. I think the authorities will have a plan and they will do a good job of, I mean, already the military's involved. There were helicopters flying from bases around Marrakech to the mountains this morning to assist with the recovery operations there. So I think that they will pull through and maybe there'll be international help. I don't know. But I do believe that we'll, there's a lot of hands-on at the moment here in the Medina I've seen, so I can't speak for what's going on in the mountains, but I do believe that they'll do a good job to get us through this.
When you say hands-on in the Medina, can you describe for us what you're seeing?
I mean, literally, people clearing rubble and so on with their hands. Everyone mucks in, so it's not just the professionals, but you know, everyone's volunteering. Anyone who neighbors, everyone is clearing stuff. I saw a taxi that's completely buried in rubble from a falling building. So people are lifting things off, and literally everyone's just mucking in and helping clear things away.
Talk to me about the situation at the guest house. I imagine there are foreigners there, travelers staying with you. They must be so frightened. How are you reassuring them?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to reassure people totally because obviously nobody knows, you know, if there's going to be another aftershock or if it's the worst is over. We've got guests staying. You may see them or hear them, and they've just come in. We had a lot of cancellations today for guests that were going to arrive today. They're no longer coming. Someone's cancelled for next week. So obviously people get nervous about these situations, which is entirely normal. But, you know, hopefully the worst is over and you know, the city continues. There you go. There they are. But it's hard it's hard to reassure people because everyone has their own personal, you know, understanding or fear level and risk level and so on.
And how is information getting to you, Peter? Has the city or the state been good about making sure you all are up to date about what's happening?
I mean, there's an incredible amount of media outlets and access online to that kind of information. So, I mean, if you monitor, you know, your favorite news channel, Twitter and so on, there's a lot of information constantly being updated. So yes, it's easy to find out what's going on. And even for the remote regions, there's information constantly being updated on that as well. We've got statistics and so on, yes.
And, you know, there in so much of the world, there are those who are in privileged positions and those who are not. And for so many ordinary Moroccans, not only is this a natural disaster, a devastating hit, but also it could ripple into a major economic hit as well. The country's already had to deal with travel bans and the pandemic and a lack of tourism, a lack of travel. There's all sorts of geopolitical issues that play themselves out in Morocco just because of its location. Is there any sense of concern, you think, about what this earthquake could mean for the country's economy?
I mean, perhaps it's too early to say. We're hoping that this won't drag on and into a big something like the pandemic. I mean, Marrakech as a city, it depends on tourism, and there's no reason to expect that needs to change in the near future. I mean, flights are coming in, the airport's completely functioning normally. People are still enjoying the city and so on. Travel around the country, certainly south of Marrakech at the moment, is difficult. I mean, some roads are blocked. So that obviously is going to affect people's livelihoods that work in tourism in those regions. But I think it's too early, certainly for me, to comment on how that's going to work out.
Okay. Peter Mercer, I'm glad you're safe. Thank you so much for making time for us today. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Salam